specific climate impacts and looking at ways in which we can use the tools provided by insurance to try to deal with this added risk due to climate change. And first of all, I also want to acknowledge that these courses have been brought to us by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And we also have support from Resilient Cities Catalyst from New York City. And we're very grateful for their support and very grateful for Wendy to lead us in this session today. And we're also very fortunate to have a guest speaker, Joyce Langford from Assembly Member Autumn Burke's office, who will also be talking with us about wildfire. So without further ado, it's all yours, Wendy. Thanks for doing this.
Sure, thank you so much. Let me just pull up our PowerPoint. So welcome to the fire class, everyone. Since we've laid down the foundation of pollution and an introduction to insurance, today we're going to talk about drought and wildfires and build from that those two classes that created that foundation, so you understand insurance, you understand what it means, the pollution exclusion, all of the regulatory agencies we discussed, and basically how that now affects drought and wildfire and the changes to insurance as we're seeing it today. So just a quick class outline. We're going to review classes 1 and 2 just to remind you just some of the terminology, a bit about pollution, talk about risks specifically, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires, a quick case study in Paradise, little refresher on what liability is and an overview. I will introduce my dear friend Joyce Langford, who I have known for probably 8 years now and is the very first person that I met that worked in this industry, and it's her fault that I'm involved in this at all. And then we're going to talk about coverage and parametric insurance. We're going to be the first introduction of what parametric insurance is, what it means, and we're going to kind of create a workshop, a pretend captive, just some crazy idea I came up with over the weekend that I decided, why not? Let's see what happens. Maybe you guys have some input, questions, certain things you want to see changed, see what happens. So real quick on a review, general liability, also called GL, and property. So commercial GL is just third-party coverage, so it's not covering you for anything that happens directly to you, but for someone that gets hurt on your property. So that's their bodily injury, their property damage, out of anything that's happening on your premises that's in your control, including some products. So if you make something and it's damaged. It does not cover professional liability. So if you're giving someone your expert opinion on something, that's something completely different, and that's a different policy. Now with property, we talked about both residential and commercial property. So the HO1s, the HO7s. HO1, your 11 named perils. HO2 is a little broader. HO3 gets even broader. Then you go into your renters and your comprehensive forms, condo and mobile home insurance. At the bottom of this screen, we have the commercial all risk / open peril. Basically, this is property coverage for your company, for your business. And it's called an all risk, meaning that everything is covered except for what's excluded. So again, I cannot stress it enough. Please read your exclusions. You want to make sure that anything you happen to think is covered is in fact covered. Really quick refresher, captives, one of my favorite topics. We're going to just talk every single class about captives. This is an insurance company that is wholly owned and controlled by the insured. So it's, if you wanted to create a captive with your city, with your town, your municipality, it's encompassing all of you as shareholders, and you pay into it, you reap the benefits from it, and it all feeds back into its own system. Now anyone can create this. I have the 5 steps here. Determine your structure, hire a manager. You want someone who's professional and knows what they're doing. Select a domicile. As we've stated, this is available in 70 countries, and there are over 70,000 captives active worldwide. So it's not something unusual. This actually does happen. And you just submit your application to prove that you do have the financial capability to do so. Really quick, state and federal regulations. I'm sure most people that attend this class are familiar with the regulations. We have NEPA, we have CEQA, RCRA, which then we have the AQMD, CERCLA. So all of these things were kind of created as a result of our case studies talking about the Love Canal, Stringfellow, Times Beach, large contaminated sites, and the actual use of federal funds to clean them up. And then with the creation of these Superfund sites and the multi-million-dollar cleanups that happened, some of them lasting 50, 60 years, hypothetically one said 500 years. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but that is what they stated. But then you go into your pollution exclusions. So again, insurance policies were originally written to have general liability cover third-party damage. That's what it covered. No one intended for pollution to be such an issue. So as a result of these Superfund sites and the claims that were made and the multi-million-dollar payouts, the insurance industry decided to exclude that coverage. Now, they didn't completely just say, you have nothing. They created a contractor's pollution liability, and then alternatively, the pollution legal liability, also called site pollution. So it's just a different policy that you would have to buy that specifically addresses the contamination situation versus general liability. And just to really nail this home, pollutant, if you look at the definition, it's any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal irritant or contaminant, including smoke, odor, vapor, soot, fumes, acids, alkalis, chemicals, and waste. That can also mean anything recycled or reconditioned. So it's an extremely broad exclusion. So you want to make sure that if you have anything that might be contaminated or a threat of contamination, get yourself the extra coverage. It'll pay for itself if you ever have a loss. Now we get into the whole point of all of these previous classes talking about specifically risks and building off of this knowledge base. So drought. Historically, it was only an agricultural risk. It's something people were worried about with crop failure. We have seen this drastically change where due to greenhouse gases, this pollution, this contamination, everything we're pumping up in the atmosphere, things are getting hotter, things are getting drier. So chain reaction, what's happening is with this heat, droughts, everything's drier, we have longer growing periods. And instead of, these heat waves are occurring every 2 to 3 years, instead of every 20. And we've all experienced this. We've had record heat waves. I believe last Wednesday, Siberia hit 101. These are things that are really happening. And as a result of crop failures, it's gonna have that further chain reaction of hitting our food supply. So going on, you get droughts, high heat, you're gonna have longer growing seasons, longer summers. This creates the fuel for the fire. More wildfires. So here's some data that I pulled out from 2002 through 2017 and 18. The largest financial hit was 2017, 18 billion. Why is that? That's when it hit Sonoma, Napa Valleys. Those were high retail value areas, high building value areas. So of course the loss was going to be greater. 2018, you had more acreage burned, but it wasn't as high value land. And as you can see, also fatalities are just creeping up. And this has a lot to do with urban sprawl. So people are moving out of concentrated cities, moving out to more rural areas. You can't get the fire trucks out there. You can't get the fire suppression out there. So that's why you're having more fatalities happen as well. Now, as a result of this increased risk, unfortunately, insurance carriers have been pulling out of the marketplace. They've had catastrophic loss. So worldwide in 2018, there was a $24 billion loss. No single insurance carrier can survive that. Yes, there are multiples involved, but they're all feeling this massive loss that is affecting all of their lines, not just property. So as a result, they're pulling out. And if they are not pulling out rather, some carriers, and this is again data I found last year, were beginning to offer increases of 20% in rate, so 20% price increase, which was the norm, or for non-admitted carriers or carriers that are not recognized by the state that you are in, some as high as 500%. Now, I have not seen that personally, but that is what I have read in some of the insurance journals that I've gone through. So real quick on our case study. Paradise. So everyone's pretty much remembers Paradise, California. This was the Camp Fire, one of the deadliest fires that we've had in our country. So it is the deadliest and most destructive in California history. It was considered the most expensive natural disaster with 16.5 billion in total estimated damage, of which only 4 billion was uninsured, and those were due to low-cost residential homes. Now, what caused this? We discussed urban sprawl. People are moving out into more wooded areas. That is what they're thinking, is you have people living in less urban areas. You can't get the fire suppression out in time. And then they're blaming there was a faulty electric line, so utility line. This is sort of an ongoing theme for the state of California, where the electricity is sparking some of these fires repeatedly. And this fire in particular burned for 17 days. That is an incredibly long time for a fire to burn. You had 85 civilian fatalities, 153,000 acres burned, and 18,000 structures destroyed. So from 2018 until last December 2019, PG&E offered a settlement of $13 billion. And in 2020, they pled guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Now, as I said, if you can see the slide, there were 85 civilian deaths. So I'm not sure why they only admitted, or rather pled guilty to 84 civilian deaths. So there is one outstanding that I could not find any information on. And they're saying that, you know, if we think about what was this triggered by, yes, urban sprawl, yes, things are drier and hotter. This is all, again, as a result of climate change. Hotter, drier conditions, longer growth periods. Then you get that grass that's basically tinder. So one of the things that piece of data I found is November of 2018, Paradise typically gets 5 inches of rain in the autumnal year. This particular year in 2018, they had 1/7 of an inch. So effectively no rain. So incredibly dry, incredibly hot, increased wind, just a myriad of factors that all came together at the most terrible time possible. And revisiting, just so you guys are really aware of what exactly is liability. So, you know, any kind of legal obligation, responsibility, or duty individuals have towards every other member of a society. So do no harm. But who is responsible when we see these things? And we're going to revisit this later. I just wanted to plant the seed in your head right now. Who's responsible when something like Paradise happens? When we have these huge wildfires, when we have the droughts, when we have the heat, the winds, you know, unprepared, you know, fire departments can't get to the right place at the right time. Who's to blame? Is it homeowners for not clearing the brush around their home, for not having fire suppressions on their roofs, not having, you know, enough water on site? Is it the utility company for their frayed wires? Is it the municipality for not having the proper services at the right place at the right time? So something we're going to discuss later on, but I just wanted to show you this quick little graphic that I created where everybody's responsible. If we don't work together, there is no solution. So the public entity, they have to uphold regulations. Whatever laws are passed, whatever mandates are ordered, it's their responsibility for public entities, municipalities, make sure people are actually doing what they say they're supposed to be doing. The utility has to maintain their lines and clear brush around their lines. It's very simple, and they're actively doing that. It's just there's a lot of land to cover. Now you're insured, that's you, that's the client, pays the insurer, which is the carrier, the insurance carrier. So the client is paying the insurance company, and they are obligated to upkeep their grounds and their homes. So clear that brush away. Make sure your home is kept up. Make sure you have, you know, proper fire suppressants nearby. And then the insurer is obligated to indemnify or cover the insured if there's a loss. So it's all circular. Everyone's kind of interconnected. There's a lot of back and forth, and we'll revisit this later on in the presentation, where I want everyone's feedback and I want everyone's comments of what they feel needs to change, needs to be adapted, needs to be evolved, because everything we're seeing right now is evolving. This kind of drought, fire, climate change, heat has not happened before. So we're all in this together. And if we all can work together for a solution, we might come up with something pretty good. At this point, I believe we are in time for we have a poll, I believe, which Dana could put up. Just a real question, since we were talking about rural areas and urban sprawl and the threat of wildfire for not being prepared in these areas and not having the proper infrastructure to deal with wildfires, if money were no object and you could get out of the city, move out of San Francisco, move out of LA, and move into one of these areas, would you? So let's just get a quick gut check to see if you would. So we have 70% no and 30% yes. If anyone, I believe the Q&A is being monitored. If someone wanted to raise their hand and maybe share with us why you'd want to move to a rural area, knowing these dangers and knowing that there's a heightened risk for wildfires to happen. Is there anyone out there who wants to share their reasoning for wanting to move to one of these more rural areas that may not be protected?
Wendy, I believe Jen Bravo has a comment, and perhaps Dana, you could free up Jen's line.
Hi, everybody. This is Jen. I just wanted to comment that there's a fascinating documentary called Fire in Paradise that interviews a lot of the CAL FIRE folks who fought that fire, and as well as the people who went through it. And one of the most interesting things I thought about it was they were very clear that climate change has changed fire behavior. So it's not just about fuel, but it's also the way the fire moves because of winds and increased heat, changing wind patterns. And what they were experiencing was that these large embers were moving ahead of a fire front and coming down right in the middle of town. And so there were a lot of spot fires, and that's very different. So firefighters historically have been able to create fire breaks and have a fire front and actually sort of have like take a stand against a wildfire. And because of obviously increased heat, increased winds, and the increased fuel, they're just having to learn how to fight fires differently. And the fact that there are so many spot fires now really lends itself to a change in home design and home construction, because the firefighters can't protect a community necessarily by having a number of fire breaks because the embers are coming down in the middle of town. They can't control for that, but you can. And when they did rebuilding, which I think Wendy's probably going to get to, the rebuilding requiring metal roofs and home hardening and those sorts of things for reconstruction.
Brilliant statement. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So one of the things, I keep mentioning there's a lot of wind. So there's been some research that our jet streams are changing. As a result of climate change, high heat, increased global temperatures, jet streams are changing, birds' migration patterns are changing, and all of this is in effect to heating and climate change, and everything's getting hotter and drier. And then going on to home hardening, I actually hadn't thought about getting into that specifically because I didn't want to spend a whole lot on the campfire because it is so new and there's a lot of, I think, open wounds still left over from that because it recently happened and it was so destructive. But yes, home hardening is where, people used to have these open eaves on their roofs. So now they have to have them all closed off. Metal construction, non-combustible material is what you call it in insurance. So you don't want wood, you want metal, you want concrete, things that are just fire resistant. And new construction going forward is going to be requiring that. So if you have an older home, you might want to think about maybe, doing some retroactive work, maybe closing up those eaves. If you have the ability to put on a fire resistant roof, that would be a great idea. There's just a myriad of things with new building codes that are coming out. Moving on, I believe, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the right time for our breakout session for questions 1 and 2. If I'm correct.
Just checking the agenda here.
I think I might be a little bit ahead of schedule.
Actually, I think it's Joy's turn.
Oh, is it Joyce? Is it?
Right after the second poll.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It is Joy's intro. So my mistake. We have Miss Joy Langford. So my dear friend who I met 8 years ago, one of the first networking meetings I went to for environmental and climate change, she and I met and we hit it off. We've been pretty much inseparable since. She's the one that brought me into the Young Professionals in Energy, a group I highly recommend joining. Not only do they have great little get-togethers and happy hours, but it's just an extremely knowledgeable group of people. But she pretty much pointed me in the right direction of learning climate change, things to get involved in, meetings to attend. So, I mean, again, I can't say enough nice things about her. But her formal introduction, I have her little bio here. So she has a Bachelor of Science in Economics and a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Planning from the University of California at Santa Barbara, and over 15 years of service as a public-private partnership liaison assisting corporations with environmental practices at the local, state, and federal government levels. She is a senior environmental, energy, and water policy advisor for Assemblywoman Autumn Burke, that's out of Inglewood, California, and currently working on addressing wildfire resiliency in Southern California. She has intricate knowledge of regulatory and compliance issues for municipalities and corporations assisting in their environmental and corporate responsibility initiatives and negotiations. Her recent projects include implementing LED street lighting projects in several Southern Californian cities, consulting on light rail and energy efficient trucking solutions for Air Quality Management District and Siemens, and implementing electric vehicle EV charging stations in several California municipalities. She has sat on the advisory board for Air Quality Management District, or the AQMD, and currently sits on the boards of the Young Professionals in Energy for both Los Angeles and Orange County, as well as the regional board for 85 Broads. So, Ms. Langford, please share. I will stop sharing my screen and you can pull up yours.
Okay.
And go from there.
Well, greetings, everybody. I don't really need to pull up my screen quite yet. Happy to be here with Climate Resolve and Jonathan and people who love to talk about energy and environment. So I'm here for it. So I made a couple of notes. I won't be speaking that long. And feel free to ask any questions. I'll try to look at the chat while I try to do everything else. But again, I'm Joy Langford, and I do ledge policy for the state of California, specifically for Autumn Burke. Our district is Westchester, aerospace industry areas of El Segundo, so on and so forth. I have two major things that I work on for the state, child welfare policy and environmental policy. Much of my environmental policy experience and background has been highlighted, especially over the last 3 years, where the state is really trying to make the coalition they're trying to make the case for wildfire policy as it relates to climate change. Prior to the last few years, wildfires were, once in a while occurrence. Now we can pretty much bank on it and depend on it every year. So with that in mind, it's a major, not only policy issue, but an economics issue for the state. How we are going to allocate money for each wildfire season. And in light of COVID this year, we are really just taking a gamble. Fortunately, last year and the previous years before, we've had some budget surpluses. We'll be lucky if we are able to get the budget managed this year without having to put too much off for the following years. Our budget this year basically consists of anything COVID related. We've moved everything else out. We've done a lot as far as child policy, for example, where we've had to cut major budgets because we are focused solely on the wildfire season coming up this year and funding everything from N95 masks to hospitalizations as it deals with COVID. And as you'll see a little bit later on, we're trying to figure out how to navigate how both are going to be meshed because COVID is a major issue as we deal with the wildfire season this year. Our first responders, worrying about them not getting too caught up in COVID and the like. So I basically work with the assembly, the utilities, insurance companies, as well as constituents to mitigate loss on all sides as it relates to insurance. So today I want to talk a little bit, I don't have much time, but to talk a little bit about the history of some of the wildfire bills that we have, tell you what we are currently working on as far as the bills, the ramification to the insurance industry on some of the policy that we're crafting, and what's coming down the pike with state insurance allocations, and the state of wildfire relief. Especially this season in light of the COVID pandemic. So just briefly, in 2018 was the peak of wildfire reform for the state of California. 2019, the beginning of 2019, we start seeing towns like, entire towns like Paradise, that Wendy mentioned earlier, being burned down. There was little recourse in sight for the homeowners, for the state who are footing the bills for relocation for some of the victims of these wildfires. And then at the same time, insurance and the utilities just began feverishly pointing the finger at each other as to who's responsible for the insurance claims in the entire areas that went unpaid. We were really first approached in 2019 by the utilities because the burdens were too high for them, and they're really too high for anybody to take on all of the risks. Just utilities couldn't take on the billions of dollars of loss. They were even having a hard time clearing out brush just to make sure that fires didn't happen in areas that they were that we were experiencing decimation. So the utilities agreed in 2019 to help us foot some of the bills, as well as help us clear the brush, but it was still too expensive for them, and we had to also try to figure out how we get the insurance dollars to kick in. And naturally, the insurance companies, they were, we're not paying basically for anything. So it came down to 2019 being a real crucial year for us to figure out who is going to pay what. Utilities decided that they would help us with the burden of clearing the brush and the lines and paying some of the, being responsible for some of the losses. Not many of them, but some of the losses as it related to trying to clean up. So that was like billions of dollars. Anywhere, when you're quoting billions, some of them were 25 billion, into the hundreds of billions. We had a great run in the stock market as well. Different activist investors that were coming to the state to lobby to try to take over some of these utilities. Currently, we're at a state where some of the utilities are starting to file bankruptcy, and the state is trying to help with some of the cost to help, strengthen some of the utilities, but we still have kind of a long way to go. Insurance is also kicking in dollars, but they're still sheepish about it. So what we are finding that we are stuck with the insurance company is trying to help them write their own policies and their own laws, not only under the FAIR plan, but working directly with the insurance commissioner to find plans that they can start renegotiating instead of threatening BK and insolvency, which both the utilities and the insurance companies are trying to do with us. But we're trying to really help them with some of our bills at the legislature to write laws and help them to ensure areas like Paradise that are going through some of these challenging times. So for example, with Paradise right now, we have where some of the insurance companies are indeed coming back in, but there's a catch. A lot of the people who want to rebuild in Paradise are finding that their insurance premiums are 3 times, if not more, of what they had originally paid for insurance premiums. So if you want to build, not only do you have to come up with the 3 times insurance that you need to come up with, your other insurances as well need to come to the table, and you're going to have to still come to the table with a lot of cash. So that's been very, very hard, and hopefully this year in the 2020, probably more like 2021, as we're dealing with COVID at the same time, we'll be able to put more money into play, as well as resources with the insurance commission to get some of these houses rebuilt. But again, it's at a higher premium. 3 times the premium, a lot of people would just assume walk, unless you have real ties to that area. Just like Wendy's poll previous, how many people want to go to a rural area if money wasn't a factor? I'd be real curious to see what that would look like for some of the people who, lived, built in Paradise, and now they're having to try to rebuild without even insurance being in play. So yeah, fast forward to 2020, we'll be allowing higher rates in the state just so that we can help mitigate some of these losses with the insurance companies. The insurance companies will be working with the insurance commissioner, but I'm not expecting too much out of that with 3 times the rate. Utilities are basically bankrupt. They have paid out over $25 billion in insurance settlement for insurance policies over the last 3 years. And now California is trying to entice insurance industry that is pulling out of burnt out areas. So we have to see how that's going to play out. Instead of even just wanting to do the 3 times higher insurance rate, a lot of the insurance companies are trying to pack up and leave areas. But there are certain parts to the law that won't allow the insurance companies just to pack up. They still have to stand by the people who they insured prior to all of these devastations. So we have to see how that plays out. Specifically, and I see some questions coming in, and I want to get to some of those as well, but specifically this year, I want everybody to watch Assembly Bill 2167, as well as SB 292. They're currently under review, and they are prime examples of how the state is trying to work with the insurance industry. So we really need to look at those two. Those two are definitely COVID or no COVID, making some traction. And with this year's limited budget, like I said, we were in a surplus last year. We're bracing for double and triple whammies with this wildfire season coming up August through October. So, a lot of times, because I know this so well, I am able to give good advice and kind of jockey position. The only good advice I can give you this year, especially with COVID going down, and that's having to worry about our firefighters and first responders as well, is pray. So whatever religion you are, your guess is as good as mine how this fire season is going to work out. And in the only light I see at the end of the tunnel is we're looking to create more climate and green jobs. That would be how I would really like to further engage all of you, as well as Jonathan and Climate Resolve. We're going to need more jobs. And we do have money in this year's budget for jobs, especially with this COVID pandemic. So if we're able to work with some other companies that are currently trying to train people, this might be a good time to jump in the picture to see what we can do to help. And lastly, as I finish up what I have to say, Climate Resolve has a really nifty page on their website. Jonathan, I just decided to bite off of you. Just really look at the Climate Resolve website and /wildfires, I think it is. They have not only the bills, but they have all of the articles from Sacramento Bee, all of the opinions that are worth listening to in a nice Excel type format with the links. That would probably be the best place for you to get started as far as really knowing what we're going to be facing as far as wildfires as well as COVID. How we're going to be dealing with the first responders, as well as he's got about 18 of the most significant bills that deal with wildfire. There are a few that I wanted to point out really quickly. Eduardo Garcia's bill. Let me see if I can pull this screen up really quickly, which I think I can. Share. Okay, am I on the screen?
Yes.
Okay,
There
great.
you
Okay, and again, this is on Climate Resolve's website, just as neat can be. Let me see. Garcia's bill right here, 1356. That's going to be a key one this year. Keep your eye on that. It's wildfire prevention, safe drinking water. In case we come across a complete catastrophe, we're going to have money allocated as a bond measure that would address climate risk in the state of California. As wildfire seasons start to come more fast and more furious, that's going to be something to really watch. Also, the bill right under it, SB 944, it compensates taxpayers for costly improvements as it relates to insurance. I'd be really curious to see how much it's going to give homeowners, because some of these things are going to really be needed. If you're living in Los Angeles and you're backed up against the Hollywood Hills, you're going to need help retrofitting for water supply, agriculture, ecosystems, that type of thing around like the Lake Hollywood Reservoir. That's going to be very important. So let me see if there's another bill on here that I want to, 1124. And again, feel free to go through these. This more so deals with healthcare for our first responders during a fire season. And they really do believe that with this fire season coming up, COVID is going to be kicking up even harder for our first responders. So that money and that appropriation is definitely going to be needed. And then lastly, I'll talk about Friedman's bill, AB 3164. That's really, really based for people who are in the insurance industry already. You really need to start looking at how they're going to allow you to help us model insurance. It's basically giving the insurance companies a chance to really get in there and model, help us model insurance issues. And then again, take a look, which I did not put that, this up, take a look at some of the op-eds and some of the things that are being done in the media regarding COVID, as well as the insurance industry. And on that same page on Climate Resolve's website, they have a list of articles and links that you can go to, as I'm running out of time here.
You got plenty of time, don't worry about it.
That you can definitely go through. But yeah, take a look at those things. Let me stop the share right here. And then let me see what some of the questions are.
Joy, I can help with that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so, and maybe it's something that both you and Wendy can address. There's some really smart questions. One is from Duane Muller, who is asking, she asked if the state of California is calculating risk, but I think it's more specific to actuaries and to insurance companies. I mean, are they doing what they used to do, which is like looking at the last 20 years, 30 years, and then trying to determine risk looking backwards? But with climate change, don't we have to look forward to accurately assess what risks we're facing?
Yes. So go ahead, Joy.
No, you go ahead first.
Okay, then you can follow up. So yeah, the historically risk modeling looked 20 years, 30 years in the past, see how things changed, see what was happening, and then you could model off of that. With climate change, everything is new. So we're dealing with an unknown, and there are a ton of think tanks out there that I've been researching, and some of the insurance companies such as Swiss Re and Munich Re are creating their own models trying to forecast what's happening and see what's happening in the future with climate change and these heat changes in jet streams. It's, again, I can't stress this enough, is how much everything's interconnected in sort of this chain reaction, and there's still an unknown. Right now we're dealing with best guess scenarios and trying to figure out with the actuaries, with the modelers, what is that premium going to be? And yes, premiums are going up. You can have your house hardened, you can do everything right, but for the past 10 years, the property insurance market was what they call a soft market. Everything was really cheap. So now we've flipped that on its head, and property is now expensive. Basically, the market corrected itself. There were so many losses in the past that they now have to charge more money to make up for that lost reserve. So you can do as much preventative work as you want. You're still more likely than not going to see a rate increase. So Joy, if you wanted to jump on that one.
Yeah, so the insurance industry is, now that they see that this fire stuff is going to go on, pretty much every year, and the decimation of land and all of the devastation along with it, and the fact that the legislature and the governor are actually making insurance pay now, instead of in the past, it was a toss-up, and insurance adjusters could come out and that wasn't their fault and there was a wire in the back. The last 3 years, we've really been working on trying to make everybody responsible. It was, the utilities say that they're not responsible. Insurance is saying that they're not responsible and that they're going to go broke. And then we're getting all of the activist investors that are coming in. The state right now is really just trying to figure out and tighten up a model, especially with the climate change initiatives that are going on and what we're learning through climate change. They're really trying to tighten up a new model for insurance, whether it is the FAIR plan or the what is the
parametrics?
The parametrics plan, where the community kind of comes together and starts putting together their own insurance, really working, like I said earlier, for the insurance companies to come to the insurance commissioner with plans, letting them figure out their own metrics, and eventually the cost of insurance is going to skyrocket unless we start working on parametric plans, where people are starting to kind of pay more into the pot. It's a kind of a tricky balance right now, and I don't know where it's going to lead to. This is probably a conversation to more have a couple years down the line, when insurance and the insurance commissioner kind of figure out what are the new legalities of doing insurance business in the state of California, because it's really up in the air. And we as ratepayers, as well as the ratepayers are really getting run over the coals right now, because it's the insurance market. The insurance is basically dictating to the state and twisting arms right now as to they're dictating it. And I think that it will level out and be fair, especially as even the utilities are taking blame and paying out billions for occurrences that happened in the past, but it's still unknown, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Let me
I mean, it's
jump in if I may. So there was legislation a couple years ago, SB 30, by Senator Ricardo Lara, and this was to establish a number of work groups to investigate ways of embedding parametric insurance into the current system. One of the things, and so they're currently meeting, and it's very exciting, some of the things they're developing. So we may have news to report within the year, but if you want to read about it, it's SB 30 at the Department of Insurance. There is a note from Saren Taylor saying that the Department of Insurance mandates that insurance look backwards 20 years, and they don't allow insurance to use climate models. Is there some legislation that possibly Assemblymember Burke could sponsor to sort of change the way in which insurance companies are allowed to look at these issues related to climate change?
Absolutely, Jonathan. As you start putting it together, we would love to, meet and see what we can do when we're able to meet. But it definitely would be something that we would like to look at how the legislative process works. If for those who don't know, Jonathan is very well aware. But we end of session this year is in November. Then around Christmas time, we will be looking at what we're going to try to work on for the next year. So that would be something for Climate Resolve and Climate Resolve ITES to start putting your heads together and start meeting with us, in the Capitol, or taking Zoom meetings, which is what's likely going to happen, in 15-minute increments with our Capitol staff and our Ledge Director.
Thanks, Joy. One
Also,
of the other questions that was asked that I thought was fascinating.
Jonathan, if I could just real quick, just add on to the tail end of that though, with respect to the modeling. Yes, you have to look back 20 years. It's not that it's prohibited from looking at climate change. We just don't have, it's not required yet. So companies like Swiss Re, Munich Re are creating those models and proposing it. And the way that rates are established, if your company is an admitted carrier, meaning is recognized by the state of California, then they have to approve how you come up with your rates, what your rates are. If you're non-admitted, meaning the state doesn't recognize you, it doesn't mean it's bad insurance, it's just not admitted paper or surplus lines. You don't have to follow the rules of approval by the state. So it's a little bit different of if you're admitted or non-admitted. So I just wanted to throw that in real quick.
So it's not strictly prohibited from
Yes.
factoring in climate models. It just takes a lot of work to do it, to prove it to the Department of Insurance. All right, one of the things that India Brookover observed, and I'm sure most climate activists have had this thought, well, if it's more expensive to live in high chaparral areas, is that a bad thing? Isn't that the marketplace speaking? And why shouldn't we allow that to take place?
That is the marketplace speaking. And as someone who, pays to live in a nicer neighborhood, I completely agree. But we also want to make sure that we're insured if something goes on. I live on a hill. I live in a pretty pricey area. I live near oil fields. I live in areas that could have potential high risk. Whether I'm rich or poor, how secure am I? How secure do I feel that my insurance will take care of me? Should something happen, that they don't run out of money, or they don't blame it on the utility company, and then my parents and I are living in tents on our prospective property for 7-8 months while the insurance company and the utility, in this case, try to figure it out. So I think it's a concern that we all have to have, rich or poor, nice neighborhood or not nice neighborhood. How is the insurance company going to rate your area, as well as are they going to pay, as opposed to go to the legislature and cry. And people in Paradise have been waiting for years at this point, for their insurance to kick in, to either rebuild or have to try to figure out, 3 times the cost to pay the insurance premium to be able to rebuild. So I just think that, especially with COVID, pandemics going on, everything else going on, the other tensions going on in the world, it's something that we all need to be concerned about, and we have to really care for our neighbor, whether our neighbor is in Paradise or right next door, about how our insurance is going to be paid. So that's just my opinion. And I think legislatively and at the commissioner's office, that's what they're trying to work on, the equity of insurance.
There's a number of questions also that are here that are trying to get at the heart of, if a homeowner does everything right, that there's the brush clearance, that you've protected your home against embers, you've taken all of these extraordinary efforts, could you see a reduction in your insurance bill? And I'm just curious to hear, what are the factors involved in determining that? And do you think California currently has a scheme to allow for that kind of discount to be awarded to homeowners who do the right thing in wildfire country?
I'm going to let Wendy start off first, because she really knows the logistics of what an insurance company will pay, and then I will give you my opinion.
Of course. So one thing they teach you, when you first start insurance, is you never answer a hypothetical claim question, because that's everything bad can happen of that. But what I can say, regarding property insurance and rates, historically it's been very cheap. Property insurance has just been very depressed. It's called soft market. So now that we're in a hard market, rates are going up. It just is. So let's say you harden your house, you do everything right, you clean the brush, you are perfect in the eyes of the insurance company as a client. So they will give you a discount, but that doesn't mean your insurance will be cheaper than it was last year. It means instead of the 30% rate increase that everybody's getting across the board, you might only get 25%, or you might get 20%. So everyone across the board will probably expect a rate increase, and Joy did touch on that, saying the state is approving that because these are admitted carriers we're talking about. So do everything you can, try to get as many credits as you can, but ultimately, I would be very surprised if anyone were to see a rate or premium decrease going forward than what they're paying previously.
I guess, Wendy, to follow up, is there a way of institutionalizing a program so that the benefits could be made greater?
So I came up with a hypothetical that we're going to talk at the end of this course, and it's completely made up, kind of going over how to, with what Joy said with the finger pointing, this kind of resolves that. Again, it's a perfect scenario. I know that we don't live in a perfect world, but it's something I wanted to touch on and kind of create this systems map of what could we do as citizens, as ratepayers, as people who buy insurance, people who live in our municipalities, to work together to solve this problem and propose it through Joy, through her people, through somebody. Maybe this is something that could work. So I'm loving the fact that Joy's kind of touching on all the points I'm going to get to in our hypothetical situation, because it's kind of going to bring all of this conversation full circle. And I'm also going to bring this up in the flood class as well, because the flood is also going to talk about parametrics. And just keep hammering this home, specifically with captives, talking about captives quite a bit.
And last question before we move on to our next section would be a question from Gnome, where he's asking, well, if people are living in places that burn down all the time, maybe they shouldn't live there. And what about retreat? I know that word is really loaded right now, the word retreat, but is that something that we should be advocating for?
When I first started studying this back in probably October, November, I met with our local fire department. I met with the fire marshal, and had that exact conversation. And he and his team said, yes, you should not be living in the rural areas. We cannot get to you. You know, just so much as a chain dragging on asphalt will cause a spark. Exposed wires, squirrels landing on utility wires that are bare. Unfortunately, they explode and cause a fire. So there are too many factors that can happen in a rural area that don't necessarily happen in urban areas or suburban areas that cause these fires, and they cannot get to you. So it does drive them crazy. They are adamant about stopping this urban sprawl. But unfortunately, especially with people working more from remotely and from home, it's simply not going to happen. More people are moving out. Joy, if you wanted to add on anything.
No, I totally agree.
So did you want to move on to, I think in our agenda, Joy, I love the conversation, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to stay with us, because as we go forward in some of this discussion, I'm definitely going to ask your opinion, being on the political, you know, legislative side of things. And so I think we have our third poll and then a breakout session where just a couple questions. And then also if anyone needs a little break to stand up and stretch a little bit. So Dana, did you have any of that up?
Just put up.
Great. So the first one is, you know, should Commissioner Ricardo, he's our Commissioner, Department of Insurance, mandate a rate freeze on insurance renewals? That means no premium change. That means what you paid last year is what you pay this year. Or rather, I'll get into that. So 67% said no, and 33% said they don't know. Very interesting results. So I think that we do need to increase rate. We've been in a soft market for way too long. One of the factors, what I talked about, premium and rate. So your premium is based on how much stuff you have. So let's say you have one house, one detached garage. If that doesn't change, your premium will stay the same, your rate stays the same. Let's say you build a second shed out back. So now you have a house, a garage, and a shed. Your premium's going to go up, same rate, but now you've added more. You have more stuff to cover. So that's going to affect your premium. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then for our breakout session, I guess we are going to hop into some breakout rooms, and where we can have a couple questions and you guys can discuss, and we can come on back and have that discussion. Dana, did you want to pull those up, or?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Real quick. And Michael's put the questions in the chat. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, perfect. Okay, we'll give it a few minutes for everybody to hop on back in, and then we're going to go into the last part. Going to basically introduce you guys to what parametric insurance is and how it works. And then we're going to go into a little pretend scenario that a lot of what we've been talking about is touching on to this little idea that I came up with. So looking forward to hopefully getting engagement from everybody. You all have really good ideas. So once we have almost everybody back in, we will go from there.
Wendy, in our breakout group, we were hearing from India Brookover from SCAG, and I was hoping that maybe Dana, you could allow India to just talk a little bit about the climate resilience planning process that SCAG is involved in. She said something very interesting before we were cut off, which is that SCAG is really considering stopping sprawl in areas that are high fire risk zones. And so I would love to hear from India for the whole group to hear from her.
All right, well, I want to emphasize that we are not an implementation agency, so we cannot dictate any land use. We cannot prevent any city or agency or developer to develop where they own land. That being said, our regional plans that we come out with every 4 years, this one has taken a hard look at the most fire risk areas and has, you know, really tried to guide development away from those areas. And that is the sort of way that we're looking at, you know, mitigation of these fire risk is just to not build there. And it also, you know, corresponds with our greenhouse gas reduction strategies and more infill development, better access to transportation. It all fits within our main goals. So that's the way we're looking at it. Of course, we acknowledge that, you know, I don't want to, I was about to say I kind of chafe at the idea that sprawl is inevitable, but I guess that is the reality. But we're trying to look at it as really guiding development inward away from these areas because it does have such a risk on human life, human property, greenhouse gas emissions. So that's really our stance on it. And then in terms we do have a big project on climate adaptation. My colleagues in my department are working on it. I'm not as familiar with the project, but I can put a link in the chat bar that will have all the latest information about it. They are looking at fire and flooding. They might be looking at insurance again. I'm not sure. So I'll add that to the chat bar.
And in India, I think the timing on that is that some of the initial reports are coming out within the month.
Oh, yeah, they are. So I'll put that in the chat bar. And
thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, Wendy, back over to you.
No problem. And I'm loving the engagement. This is exactly what we're hoping for. Let me just hop back to my slides, which for some reason popped over to the beginning. That's interesting. Oh no, there it is. So we finished that. So we went through that. So now we're going to hop into coverages and parametric insurance, which we've been touching on little bits here and there throughout the entire class. So real quick with coverage on droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. So primarily crop insurance was the issue. This is purchased by agricultural producers, subsidized by the federal government. It's for crop failure. This is for your product that you grow. If the crop dies, you are out of your income that year. And it's primarily for the corn, cotton, soybeans, and wheat. Simultaneously, we have wildfires. That's what we've been talking about, primarily a property insurance issue. So it indemnifies or covers your owner from fire, explosion. And then the alternative is the FAIR plan that we've been talking about. One thing I want to talk about that Commissioner Lara has been doing is he put a moratorium. He required insurance companies to still offer insurance coverage the following year. So you can't cancel, you can't non-renew. And he also is asking the FAIR plan to add HO3 coverage. Now, if you recall, when we talked about the FAIR plan, it was just those named perils, fire, explosion, and smoke. Those three things, very simple coverages. HO3 was that broad, open peril coverage. So everything covered except for what's excluded. They're currently discussing this through, I believe, some attorneys, but it is a good idea that maybe FAIR plan needs to be a little more broad in their coverage, or perhaps What I'm proposing is something brand new, so we'll get to that in a minute. Parametrics, so this is what we've been talking about. It's not new, came out in the 1990s, but it's now getting a lot of attention with climate change, with the fact that we have bigger fires, bigger waves. How do we, how do we ensure something where a coral reef is getting damaged, a mangrove is getting damaged, so therefore the neighborhood's entirely flooded, or the firestorms are so big that entire cities and counties are getting burned down? You can't do it all loss. So you come up with these grades or levels of trigger points for this parametric insurance. So it does not cover pure loss, triggering events such as catastrophic. So perfect example I love to give is and we'll talk about this in the flood class, there's going to be a case study on it, but Quintana Roo in Mexico has an insurance policy that covers their coral reefs. Now, when I first heard of this, I thought, who on earth would cover a coral reef? It basically provides this buffer that protects the sand and the beaches of this very resort town. So all the hotels, all the economy is 100% tourism, or 99% tourism. If that beach gets damaged or eroded away, they lose their economy. So Quintana Roo had this great idea. They worked with an insurance company and they came up with a policy that for every category, so you have a category 1 hurricane, category 2, category 3, etc. That's when you get your coverage. So hypothetically, category 1 storm comes in, you get 10% of your limits. Category 2 comes in, you get 20% of your limits. And it builds up. I don't know the exact structure. I haven't seen the actual policy, but that was the premise that was provided when I attended this particular presentation. It's not meant to replace normal insurance. We're going to discuss that shortly, but it's useful when you have a lack of appetite, which is what we have right now. So it's not a new concept, but it's getting a lot of attention moving forward for this new risk that we now see. There's a lovely little picture on the side. In the PDF handouts I gave you have this, so you can refer to that later, and you can do some additional research if you like. So further on, just covering, restating the fact, the warnings that parametric and wildfires. So California legislation, and Joy hopefully is still on if she can comment on this. So California legislation required local emergency notification systems to warn residents of danger. This could serve as your trigger. How big is the fire coming? How severe is it? Do we have hotspots? Is there a breaker that we could put in, a barrier? So whatever the trigger is, could be your trigger in your parametric insurance, just something to think about. And then these insurance policies are just unique to the needs. It could also provide the wildfire evacuees with rapid funding. So that's something most people don't think about. You think about the house that burned down, the car that burned down, loss of possessions. How about where are you going to live? It's not like most people can't just check into the local hotel and wait it out. We are waiting for your coverage for years, waiting for your house to be rebuilt. Where do you go? So it's all of these things to think about, and Swiss Re did launch a policy that covers the wineries. So if you recall in 2017, big fire in Napa and Sonoma Valleys. So they're now creating this policy. I haven't seen all the trigger points, but it is basically for the vineyards because they lost a ton of product. A ton of their economy was through tourism and selling their wine. So this is where we're going to get creative. This is my little idea. And I would love interaction as much as possible on this. And Joy, I'm not sure if she was able to stay on, but revisiting our captive policy where we have basically it's triggered by, a captive policy being triggered by parametric insurance. Captives, shareholders, everyone's involved, your business, your coverages, you participate in the loss, you participate in the profits, everything gets put back into the system. This is an enclosed circular system. So let's look at what we have. One of the things we talked about was finger pointing. So if you got the utility companies, your public entities or municipalities, cities, states, insurance carriers, and your homeowners to work together to what I'm calling the Wildfire Alliance, for lack of a better term, and you create a captive insurance policy based on parametrics, where these guys are all working together. So these guys are the captive. They're all the shareholders, and they participate together, they lose together. You get your actuaries involved, community engagement, policy writing. We're going to go step by step. So hypothetical, let's just say 3rd District by Supervisor Sheila Kuhl says, okay, we're going to do this. So you have 431 square miles, 2 million residents. You need a large footprint. You need a large spectrum of people, coverages, terrain, and risk. If you're only going to cover the high risk areas, it won't work. If you're only going to cover the low risk areas, it won't work. You need a large swath of varying people, varying risks, and varying degrees. So if we get it, again, this is completely made up. Let's say we get approval. Public entity arm, that's your municipalities. So councilmen or women within the District 3 area, they select their representatives, and they're responsible for upholding this insurance policy that we're going to make. Regulating the utility companies, the insurance carriers, and homeowners, making sure everyone's doing what they are supposed to be doing to make this work. Then you have the insurance arm carrier. Who do you choose for your insurance carriers? Now, this would be a long process. I did not put all of it here because it's way too much to go into, but you would need a large selection. You can't have one insurance carrier. They would go bankrupt. You would need to interview 10 to 15 carriers. From that, select 7 to 10, the large ones, the ones that have large reserves in their bank accounts, the ones that have a long history of underwriting. And then you assess your risk, you set your rate, and you write the forms. Sounds easy enough, but it's really not. Your utility arms. So this is your SCE, PG&E, other electrical and energy companies. Joy had mentioned that some VC companies were looking to buy PG&E. I had not heard of that. That's brand new to me. That would be a very interesting concept if PG&E were to sell part of themselves off. But this would be the utility arm, utility companies being responsible for maintaining the wires, clearing brush, etc. And then the homeowners. This is the fourth and final arm. They all have to work together. And basically, you would need that diverse participation. So the large swath of individuals from high risk to low risk, determine it that now this is another issue. Do you force people to participate or do you allow people to opt out? That would be a very long discussion to have because some people don't want to be forced. Some people want to be part of the program, some don't. So that would be very touchy, something, again, long discussion sometime in the future, but community engagement would be huge. So once you get all these factors together and you create your captive, or rather you create your alliance, then you have to start thinking about how to create the captive, which we went through our 5 steps over on the right-hand side. But you'd have to establish the financial contributions from utilities and public municipalities. What does that mean? So homeowners wouldn't just be paying a premium, wouldn't just be paying the rate. Everybody would be contributing. So you have municipalities paying in, utility companies paying in, insurance companies are handling the coverage, so they don't pay into their own program. And then homeowners would pay in, but because of these other 2 contributing factors, it would be less. And again, this is a perfect world scenario, I understand that. So once you get sort of the buy-in from everybody, then you can choose your structure, hire your manager, and proceed with your application. Now, assuming that captive is approved, then you could go in with that public engagement. This is where we start getting more interesting. Actuaries, risk engineering. Risk engineers are some of my favorite people. My background's geology. I worked as an environmental consultant. So these are the guys in the field that will actually walk the site, determine how bad the risk is or how good the risk is. So they're the ones that they evaluate the levels. And then they would recommend probably which parametrics should be used, which level of fire would be covered by what. And then you get your actuaries, which some of the smartest people I've ever met, very shy, but very smart people, and they would come up with the numbers. These are the numbers, guys. They're going to look historically. They're going to use the new models, hopefully pull everything together and come up with different rates, even a sliding scale, depending on what it is, and determine what everybody should pay into, how much it should be. And then that's when you go again back to your community. I'm recommending 3 engagement meetings. That seems to be a nice, simple number. Large meetings with, town halls, see what people have to say, what their involvement is, see if people want to opt out. You have to get, everyone's opinion in there. And then that's when you create your underwriting team. So your underwriters, those are the ones that are actually writing the policy, writing the forms. You get legal involved, you get management involved to approve, deny, tweak some things. I've been involved in writing policies. It's long. It's a long, arduous process. And legal's involved to basically, one of the first things I learned is a semicolon can change everything. So they are very much needed in this policy writing. And then going into your execution. So once you have all of these things, your underwriting involved, your policy writing involved, and you go to your management, Then you kind of present it back to the carriers, or rather your captive parametrics. And that's when you have to train. You want everybody in your underwriting department who's going to be writing these policies, issuing them to insureds, you want them all to say the same thing. You don't want one underwriter saying, yeah, I'll do that, and another underwriter saying, no, we don't do that. So everybody has to say the same thing, underwrite it the same way, release the form, and then servicing or your claims people. So TPA means just third-party administrators or in-house claims, whichever is acceptable to whatever the alliance turns into. And again, this is just an idea. This is just something I played around with over the weekend. And I would really love if people had comments, questions, suggestions, any kind of input that this may work. It may be a terrible idea, but it's just when we kept talking about captives, talking about participation by insurance companies, an insurance carrier can't do it alone, not with this kind of loss, not with this kind of high risk that we're dealing with. So maybe if we all got together, and I'm just going to open up the floor now. I think we've got some time. We have about half an hour left. And perfect time for discussion, questions, arguments. Feel free to ask away. I think we might have some questions if Jonathan wants to hop in on that.
I've got some questions. I submit them written and then get called on. Is that how we do it?
Just go for it.
Just go for it.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand in your scenario, the coverage area, it's for a particular utility in that area, right? So it'd be SoCal Edison would be, and then it's all the homeowners in that utilities area. Now, the people who are in the low risk part are kicking in for the people who are in the high risk part. So you've got a subsidization issue there.
But it wouldn't just be individuals. You would have participate, and again, this is a made up scenario, but you would have participation from utility companies, municipalities, their funding, and that would offset some of the higher costs that the individual homeowners would have to pay.
But would it? Because at the end of the day, when you talk about from the utilities, their money all comes from the ratepayers. So ultimately, in order for the utility, like if you go to the Public Utilities Commission right now, the insurance portion of a utility is recoverable within their rates. So the utility would be able to pass through their share to ratepayers. Or you have a whole nother separate issue about how utilities operations are funded. So, and then municipalities are funded by taxpayers who are the same homeowners in that scenario. So they've got to, there's some opportunity cost for the municipality in the terms of they're taking some of their general fund or they're putting a special assessment on homeowners to fund their share. So at the end of the day, it's really those same people are paying it through three different pockets, but they're all paying it. You know,
the difference being is you're not dealing with one homeowner paying for one insurance company.
Correct.
Where they could go bankrupt, they could have a giant loss. So it's trying to even the playing field out. And yes, I understand ratepayers and taxes, but there are funds established, and it's just
you're trying to deal with the solvency risk issue. I get that, but I'm just trying to say at the end of the day, there's some policy trade-offs inherent in there, right? Which are, at the end of the day, you're going down a road of socializing some of that risk, and that might or might not be something people want to do, but it's traditionally not something you do in homeowners insurance. It's something that happens regularly in health insurance. But even the former insurance commissioner Dave Jones, when he was part of the SB 901 commission that looked at this utility liability issue, one of the things he talked about was really sending a market signal of risk and tying those decisions. I think people here have talked about this idea of, do you tie the decision to live in a higher risk area, or do we inure people from that decision by subsidizing their choice to live there? And so I think it has a huge policy consequence in that. And then you have the other piece, which is even for those large insurers, there's only so much capital. You know, there's a reason why a lot of commercial insurers were limiting how much insurance they were willing to sell to utilities, just because given all the risks out there, you know, that one, particularly with regard to PG&E, wasn't a good one. You know.
So I guess an excellent points. I mean, this is just something thought of last weekend.
Yeah.
But moving forward, like what is there is no right answer. I understand that, but rather than, you know, finding everything wrong with it, maybe there are pieces that could move forward, thought concepts, because the way it's working now isn't for the long term. There's too much, the risk is getting more severe, the losses are getting larger. It's gonna get worse before it gets better, hypothetically. So what can we do to help maybe not just mitigate the risk, but help solve this ongoing problem? And parametrics is what carriers are doing. And I'm just taking that parametrics idea and kind of keeping it in-house with multiple participants.
Well, was your parametric designed to cover homeowners insurance broadly, or just for to insure for utilities, insuring them against a utility caused wildfire?
It would basically be, and this is again hypothetical, parametrics in response to wildfire happening. So wildfire comes in, and let's say it destroys Agora Hills. It hits, you know, what they considered like this second category or trigger 2, where you get 50% of your policy limits. So everybody being a captive, the loss is paid through the captive via the shareholders. Any profit from incoming funds gets also equally shared. So keeping it in-house as a separate fund. So this wouldn't be where the insurance companies keep taking the money and keep it in their banks, and the utilities don't keep it in their banks. This would be something off to the side.
But it's an HO3 policy for all perils. It's not just the utility caused wildfire. And wildfire can be caused by anything. Could be someone
exploding squirrels. They actually cause quite a few wildfires, according to the fire department.
Okay.
And again, lots of ideas to hash out, and that's why community engagement's huge. But what we have now is, you know, there's a lot of people are asking more questions and just trying to figure out more answers.
One of the things that we discovered in the Woolsey fire investigation is that a lot of folks didn't have, they were underinsured. That they built their homes or they took care of their homes in the, you know, 1970s, but when their home burned down in 2018, the value had dramatically shifted. And then as local governments do the right thing and they update their building codes, was their insurance on par with the new requirements that for rebuilding? And oftentimes they're not. And then there are instances of people who had paid their mortgages, and the reason they had insurance in the first place is because it was part of their mortgage. Well, when they paid off their mortgage, they said, okay, I'm done with my insurance. And so they were even uninsured entirely and took a 100% loss on their buildings. And one of the other things that we discovered is the additional living expenses, the ALE. A lot of folks felt like they didn't want to draw down the funds that they would receive from their insurance company. So they kind of roughed it. They lived out of their cars. They had mobile homes and trailers that they brought onto their burned out properties. So sometimes it's good to state the problem, get the problem statement out there, and then figure out what the remedy is based on that.
I totally agree. And I mean, that's what I love with this, you know, with what Saren was talking about is, let's identify the problems, the things that may not work, the coverages that may not work, and try to work through it to maybe propose a resolution. And this won't happen in a day, won't happen in a month. It'll happen probably in years. But at least we can get the conversation started and get people involved and maybe get some buy-in.
All right, so if I can
please
interject. Hey, Wendy, how are you?
Hi, Ed.
I have a couple of things here. One, on how it might be structured and funded, and then secondarily, how does parametric work into this? And I don't have all the answers. I've been working on this problem for pollution, not for fire. So, but I think from a fundamental standpoint, how a program might be structured was that it starts with a captive, potentially funded by homeowners, government, and utility. Insurers would only be there to be excess of the captive. In other words, if
I like that.
captive is exhausted, then the insurers step in. So the insurer is one step removed. So that, I'm a broker, so I'm not saying we want to protect the insurers, but we really have to, because we want insurance to be available and affordable. So that's the basic structure of that. Now, parametric, there has to be a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a traditional sense, with property damage, say hurricane, it's the strength of the hurricane and if that hurricane's moving through your property. So if it's a category 1, then it's a 10% payout, automatic. Category 5, it's 100% payout, automatic. How do you build that parametric trigger with wildfire? If the fire starts, it's probably too late.
Yeah.
So
that's one of the things with the risk engineers getting involved.
Yeah. So think about the fire triangle. What creates fire? Because it's just a chemical reaction. It's 3 things, right? Heat, fuel, and oxygen.
Yeah.
So here in the Bay Area, and maybe it's the same down in SoCal, and we get these red flag warnings. In other words, they're predicting wind speed, low humidity, and assess the dangers in those areas. So those might be the things that you have to take into account to develop a sort of trigger ahead of time. So if you've got high winds, 0 humidity, and lots of brush that haven't been dealt with, you've met the 3 items of the fire triangle. Then then the captive is ready, is positioned to pay out. There may not be damage, but it's positioned to pay out.
But what would be, so they're paying damage, or they're paying on no loss?
Well, that's the thing. I've always asked the question. I've talked to parametric underwriters over the last few months, and there's no auditable process. In other words, they're going to pay out regardless, but they don't go back and check to see how much damage there really was. So in fire, they may have to have an auditable process, but you pay out, but then you have to go back and see how much damage there really was. And if there was only 20% of the damage that met that trigger, then you pay it back. Or if it was 100%, then you keep the money. So anyway, these are just some ideas that
I love it. One of the things I just wanted to bring in was one of the trigger points mentioned was when California legislation required local emergency notification system. So that could be one of the uses for a trigger, or one of the things you could use as your trigger is talking about your low humidity, the high winds, high risk of danger. We would just have to figure out what the loss is, because you don't want to pay out on a threat. You want to pay out on something that exists, or else you might bankrupt your captive.
Exactly, and that's the challenging part with is calculating the potential loss.
Yeah, this whole thing's challenging. And no one has a right. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to walk through it. That's why, first class was the basic, what is insurance? How does it work? Then pollution, so people understand pollution's, something else that's excluded. Now we're in the phase of, fires. How do we address fires? Floods. Floods are huge, primarily. Well, it's a big issue in San Francisco. My case study next week is going to talk about that. Our guest speaker is professor out of Santa Cruz. He's written numerous papers on this. He's actually quite an expert. Ricardo Lara actually used his data in a UCLA presentation. So it's ongoing. And we have no answers. we're still, it's a daily, and I love the input you've given, and I'm glad you were able to make the class. But yeah, keep up with the ideas. And if anyone else, you know, Saren had great comments as well. This is what we need to do. We need to walk through this, and this won't work, this will work. It may work if we do X, not Y. And that's what we're trying to get out of this, is how can we work together to resolve a problem and perhaps present it.
Wendy, we had a couple questions in the chat.
Sure.
William Golding suggested that one trigger could be the level of moisture in the fuel load.
So in the trees, I would assume.
Soil moisture. A comment from Hank is that earthquake insurance is not part of standard homeowner coverage.
No.
Separate coverage is available, as we discussed last week. Could wildfire be defined and excluded from standard homeowner coverage with a separate wildfire insurance purchased, as it's done with earthquakes?
It could. I mean, I don't know personally, but it wouldn't surprise me. And maybe Ed could pop in, because even though Ed said he's just a broker, I've known Ed for years. He is an environmental person. He's worked in insurance for many years. His background is also environmental geology. So he knows this stuff very, very well. But excluding fire,
yeah,
anything's possible, I suppose. I just don't know personally.
I think when our breakout session, I did mention briefly that the state may come back with some sort of, like the Earthquake Authority is available, and there might be an equivalent program to offer fire insurance as well. Now, but then some of the comments I heard back was that from the perspective of earthquake insurance, not everybody buys earthquake insurance. It's not cheap. I personally have it. I think we should, living in the Bay Area, as you folks live in Southern California. So it's an option. So, but I think that's something to think about, is that the state probably will come up with something to make available. And it's just whether or not you're willing to pay for it.
The only underlying problem with that, like earthquake insurance will hit an entire area, and if your house gets damaged, you say, yeah, this cracked, that broke. With fire, it's going to hit everybody, and whether or not you hardened your house or cleared the brush. So it's not going to be more individualistic. It'll more likely be large communities are wiped out. That's one of the hiccups. I mean, great concept, and you know what, that may be what happens is we come up with a separate fire insurance policy, and then to be considered part of that policy, you have to follow all of these mandates, all of these rules. They have inspections happen, violation, you know, if you're violating anything, you know, you lose your coverage maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs.
Hank wrote, the policy would not exclude standard fires, only wildfires as described.
But how do you separate wildfires from standard fires? There's always going to be a lawyer that finds a great loophole. We know that in the pollution world. That's why the pollution exclusion has been rewritten so many times.
Okay. Carlos Moran had a question about different income levels, and are these risks being spread equitably across different income levels?
So one of the thoughts with, you know, this large area is, you know, everybody would basically be paying the same rate. And that would be the great equalizer. Saren pointed out so many errors in that thought process, but in a perfect world, it would have to be a large area where you would get external factors paying into it, such as a utility company, municipalities. And then the rate, you know, the individual homeowner would have a lower rate to offset some of these higher costs. Perfect world scenario, but yeah, that is the whole point, is I'm trying to find a way to make things on a more level playing ground, because you do have situations where people cannot financially harden their homes. They can't afford to put on a metal roof or close the eaves or even clear the brush. And then you have to think about alternatives to that. How do you help them? And again, an idealistic world, but something we might have to consider.
Wendy, this is Carlos again. So I like the concept of having to be able to have us all assume responsibility, not responsibility, but just kind of share in the in a solution to climate change, right? And insurance and the impacts of it. What would be some ways that, I mean, could there be some sort of percentage? You know, I'm looking at the map right here that you have of supervisorial district 3, and there's within the high wildfire zones, the mountainous regions along the 101. You know, there's people there that live on trailer homes, RVs, very low income. You know, up above near the 210, a lot of what the California state defines as disadvantaged community, meaning that they meet income levels below federal poverty level, a certain percentage below it. I mean, so there's situations where some families can't afford it because it's so high. And then they really can't afford it because they don't even make that much income. And I'm wondering if there's like a scale that can be worked out, and maybe the actuaries can help us figure out.
What you're referring to is called a sliding scale, and it exists, and actuaries much brighter than I will ever be could probably answer that better than I could. But yeah, you could come up with a range of income levels, where you live. Like if you live in a super high risk area, it may not be the smartest idea to offer the cheapest insurance rates, because that's really not fair to people that are living in, you know, that did everything right. Maybe you can't afford to harden your house, but you can clear your brush. I mean, I do all of my own gardening and landscaping, and it's terrible and it hurts, but I like doing it. That being said, I firmly believe that there should be some way to equalize it so everybody can participate. How that's exactly does sliding scale is a great idea. Again, you'd need your risk engineer involvement, actuarial involvement, to figure out that mathematical equation. But it's a very, very good idea, and I fully agree with you on that.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.
Well, Wendy, I think unless there are any more questions, maybe we could wrap it up and you can tell people what to expect next Tuesday.
Let me go through to the end. So, oh dear, didn't mean to do that, guys. So next class, July 7th, this is our flood, storms, and surges. Basically, we're going to take everything we learned today in the past 2 classes, and instead of applying it to fire, we're applying it to floods. And our guest speaker is Michael Beck. Again, I met him, I read one of his papers and reached out to him on LinkedIn. Crazier things have happened. Had one phone call with him, and 10 minutes in, I asked him to be a guest speaker, and he said yes. So very brilliant guy. He is on the forefront of this type of research. This is what he focuses on. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. He's going to do the whole case studying on Cancun, Mexico, Quintana Roo. And we will look forward to talking to you guys then. So again, my contact info is here. If someone has specific questions, want to go into something more in depth, want to discuss this harebrained idea I had, please give me a call. I'm more than happy to hear what's terrible, what works, what's bad, what's good, what I completely screwed up on. Lord knows I've done it before. So please reach out. I'm here, and I will turn it back over to Jonathan and Climate Resolve.
Thanks so much, Wendy. And Wendy, please do us the favor of thanking Joy for her presentation as well.
I will give her a call right after this. Thank you.
Please do. And I want to thank all of you for coming, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you, guys. You take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.